90% of companies around the world are small to mid-sized firms, and 70% of the global GDP is driven by these small to mid-sized enterprises. And what we find is about 67% of the total population of these small to mid-sized companies face issues of survival and expansion. When I talk about survival, I'm talking in terms of profitability, access to funding, access to technology. And when I talk about, I also talk about growth, because it is their inability to scale operationally that prevents their growth.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Decoding the Industrial Revolution, where we dive into the minds of the visionaries transforming the landscape of industry and innovation. I'm Arvind Sarin, and today we have a special guest who brings over 2 decades of expertise in global supply chain and operations management. He's a master at process improvement and risk management, turning challenges into opportunities for some of the biggest names and rising stars in the business world. He's the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Tricord International and an executive member of International Leap Network. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming the remarkable Rahul Gangulee. Welcome to the podcast, Rahul, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Arvind. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. Yes, this is super exciting. We've had a lot of conversations already, even before doing this podcast, and I'm super excited to be, sharing some really inspiring stories and some insights with our audience. I think there's going to be a lot of buzz around this podcast, so super excited. Let's start with understanding your career journey with us and what inspired you to pursue a career in global supply chain and operations management, and what are some of the key milestones along the way?
To explain my career journey, let's go back about 28 years ago. And this started with me crossing the shores of India to come to the United States as a very young graduate student in the Midwest for a master's degree in industrial engineering. At that point in time, I had no clue of what supply chain management is or was, because there was no formal topic called supply chain management, which in today's day and age is actually taught around colleges as a formal degree. After I graduated, I joined a company called Case New Holland, which is part of the Fiat Group in their manufacturing leadership program. And I was rotated through multiple functions, production supervision, product engineering, etc. However, my first foray into supply chain management came in the picture when I was selected to be one of the first cohorts of Six Sigma Black Belts, which was a very, very new concept in terms of product and process improvement that was taking the industrial world by storm. And one of my first projects I distinctly remember was to solve an inventory working capital issue associated with certain components. So that was a little bit of an informal entry into the world of supply chain. And the world of supply chain actually intrigued me. So it had to intrigue me at that point in time, because I thought it was a wildly collaborative and a cross-functional topic where you need not have a master in any single topic, but it is a synthesis of multiple disciplines, which was engineering, business, economics, finance, so on and so forth. And that really interested me a lot. And from that point on, my career began to evolve, not directly into supply chain, but functions supporting supply chain. From there, I went into recreational marine, building yachts, where I served in their operational excellence team, trying to improve processes, not only internal to the company, but also in the supply base. So as you can see, my evolution was beginning. So I say my foray into supply chain was more accidental than it was a well thought out career journey. And then from that point on, I went on to multiple different industries, starting with wind turbines to medical devices to pharma. Now, all of these post-recreational marine We're very, very focused on supply chain. And when I talk about supply chain, I talk about the four key pieces that folks may know of, which is plan, source, make, and deliver, utilizing the supply chain operations reference model. And I had the privilege then to not only design supply networks, establish the technology side, such as ERP implementations, as well as in the recent years, also we have been working with organizations to help us with the AI movement that has come into the picture. So this is me in a nutshell in terms of my journey through the world of supply chain. Please feel free to ask away if you have any questions or any clarifying questions.
No, that's fantastic. Quite a journey. And I think there are a lot of similarities, as we've talked about in my journey as well. That's how I came to the United States to get my master's. That was 20 years ago. And I think you were in Midwest, and I came here where telecommunication is key in Dallas, Fort Worth area, and started working with Fujitsu, and then got my MBA from UT Austin. And that's when I started a company building mobile solutions, but eventually transformed that into full-blown digital transformation initiatives across the board for various industries. And of course, that's how I ended up there. So it's a fascinating story, and looks like you're saying that it was by chance, but I'm sure there were seeds planted along the way, and it was just meant to be. So tell us more about your current role at Tricord International, and also about the company. What sets it apart in terms of your approach to supply chain and operations management?
So Tricord International is a startup, and the core idea behind the startup is, I'll start off with some facts. 90% of companies around the world are small to mid-sized firms, and 70% of the global GDP is driven by these small to mid-sized enterprises. And what we find is about 67% of the total population of these small to mid-sized companies face issues of survival and expansion. When I talk about survival, I'm talking in terms of profitability, access to funding, access to technology. And when I talk about, I also talk about growth, because it is their inability to scale operationally that prevents their growth. So Tricord International was an idea which was developed to support these small to mid-sized enterprises leverage the best practices of supply chain management, where you could bring the work closer to the SME's doorstep, so that they now have the tools and the ability to enjoy the fruits of a global supply chain, which large companies like the one that I had been part of, Siemens, Merck, KSV Holland, the Fiat Group, have always had this as part of their footprint. So this is what sets us apart. So you have companies, if you take a look at the big 10 consulting firms, starting from McKinsey to Deloitte to everybody, all have phenomenal supply chain solutions that they bring to bear, but they work. Their clientele base is people that already have the tools and the resources necessary. Us, we are trying to get it to the doorsteps of the folks that necessarily A, do not have that awareness, B, they do not know how, both in terms of technology, process, and capability. So that's who we are, and that's what we are trying to do.
Love it. That's fantastic that you chose this market segment, because of course for any economy, small, medium businesses are so important. In fact, small businesses, specifically the number of companies that are around that are small businesses is exorbitant. And I think partly because of the reasons that you described, we also target small, medium-sized companies where they may not have the resources to have a full-blown team internally. So they would leverage a partner, a technology partner, and utilize our help and our expertise to build those solutions that are world-class. And a lot of times, just only for the longest time, the large companies could dream of having, but we're able to give them those solutions, those platforms, those custom applications that they can then utilize. And I've seen that the learning is next level when we work with them as well. So in your experience, what have you like? What are majority of your engagements like? What are the types of areas that you help these small, medium sized businesses with? Like, what would be a typical engagement for you?
So first of all, let's talk about let's talk about the size of the company, right? And when I talk about a small to mid-sized enterprise, as defined by the World Economic Forum, it is anywhere from $500,000 to 45 million is your typical small to mid-sized firm. But we extend that definition to include about $500 million as well, up to that level. So our engagements can fall into many different areas. For instance, it could be helping a company reduce their cost of goods. And as we all know, in a typical manufacturing company, especially when you're manufacturing a product, about roughly 70% of your COGS is associated with the material side of it, and about 30% is labor. So this is one very typical area. What we try to do is to kind of find the levers associated with supply chain management to help lower the cost of that of the material cost. And the way we do that is either through global sourcing, finding partners for these companies across the world, which could be in Vietnam. India is very much for rising manufacturing power. It could be India, it could be Turkey. Whatever makes the best sense for this company in terms of what we call is risk-adjusted best cost. So not necessarily the lowest cost, but the risk-adjusted best cost. So that's one. The other one could be helping these companies with managing their sensitivity to changing commodity pricing by structuring their supply agreements as such. The other way could be also helping them redefine their supply their logistics networks. Where does it make sense to create a hub? How do you consolidate loads? Who should you be developing a relationship with? Even if it's a multi-billion-dollar organization such as C.H. Robinson and so on and so forth, if they need access to innovation. So for instance, if you have a company that requires certain innovation in their electronic manufacturing, but they don't have access to NVIDIA, then are there alternate players such as in Taiwan or in Vietnam or even in India to help open that access channel for them? So these are our typical engagements. And depending on the complexity, it takes anywhere from, it can be anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. Now, we also have engagements with larger organizations. Very recently, we finished an engagement with a $500 million organization where it had nothing to do with the cost side. It had to do with opening up their supply channels because they were so badly impacted by the availability of solid-state devices coming out of COVID-19 that they were completely hamstrung in terms of the ability to ship the products on time to their customers. So, which was at a risk of almost destroying the product in the marketplace. So these are the kind of engagements that we work with. So
got it. That gives me a good idea on what are the kinds of problems you're helping your customers with. What about utilizing technology? Can you tell me about how has technology transformed supply chain management in the recent years? And if you can provide some examples of technological innovations that have given, that edge or have significantly impacted your work?
So first of all, because artificial intelligence is on everybody's mind, right? I mean, everyone talks about AI. Now, for a startup company, we have to bootstrap, right? So we want to spend our resources very, very expeditiously as opposed to larger companies that have very much deep pockets, right? So one area that we have found is when we are doing cost modeling, artificial intelligence has come in really handy in terms of helping us develop cost models. And I would say by sectors. So for instance, because we deal in the world of gross margin and COGS quite a bit. For instance, when I am looking at a life sciences product versus an industrial product, the cost structure is very, very different. And so the data pooling we get out of AI helps us get very close to the benchmark cost criteria associated with these sectors. That's one. The second area of technology that we see is, and really we see evolving and we help our clients with, is in terms of the visibility side as it pertains to delivery, which is the transportation management solutions, TMS. So TMS is very, very key, because once you get into the last mile, or once, even if it's shipped out of your suppliers, what you call doors, you have you have a lot of visibility in where that given widget, that part, or the subsystem is, which allows your customers to have good visibility in terms of not only what is coming, but they can plan their production around it much, much easier.
It's also the number one trend. It's also the number one trend, like transparency. I know there are so many companies that are working on this initiative on how to have that next level transparency and, create a platform where they can see exactly where the product is, when it was shipped. And even we work for an organization, that Trinsight. They are the largest in the United States and do rail freight, type stuff. And they have temperature controlled, goods that they have to supply. So that's why they help their customers know the exact temperature within that carriage. And of course, they help with the GPS monitoring, so you know exactly where the supply is. And of course, you talked about AI. That's, extremely critical. And I understand, cost modeling could be an important thing for your customers, and that's where you're utilizing AI. I'm very fascinated to hear that. We've only done a handful of use cases. Of course, the most popular one is in demand forecasting. So
you are absolutely right. I was going to add to that. And it's very interesting you bring that up, because demand forecasting, especially when you start talking about independent demand, not necessarily the dependent side, but the independent demand where, you're selling retail. And in the past, even up until like 5-6 years ago, you would take the past demands, build some amount of, cycle factors into it and develop a regressive model. But now, with the advent of computational capability afforded by AI, I think that area is going to continue to really develop. Not to the extent it becomes a crystal ball, but it'll be close to a crystal ball in the next 10 to 15 years. That's my absolute guess.
Absolutely. No, I think it's going to be like that. But what about some of the smaller organizations like that have maybe only a dozen trucks, and if they cannot afford to have, a 5-people technology team to create that model? How are those people, the small, medium-sized businesses, going to take advantage of these AI solutions?
But that is exactly what AI affords you. Is you don't have. As the word suggests, AI, right? So I think it is the adoption of the technology, and I can see AI becoming more and more powerful, as the word suggests. You could make an analyst. You could have an avatar like me becoming an analyst. In fact, I can see AI helping small to mid-sized businesses more than hurting them. We talk about it because you're making the calculations, the modeling much more accessible, without the need for PhDs to come and do this modeling for you.
I agree with you that it's not statistics and it's AI, so you don't need those modelers to come in and do the forecasting and pretend like they have a crystal ball. But what about an organization that doesn't understand the capabilities of AI? An organization that's so small, they can't afford to even have some data science engineers, right? They're not cheap. So, And I guess it's a little bit of a rhetorical question. Of course, they can contact you
Yeah.
and, leverage that type of expertise. Of course, if they want to build something custom, they can contact us. We've built tons of platforms like that where we can use different parameters and try to model that. But what I'm even talking, like, I think in the coming years, even a pizzeria, a one-man shop, can then predict that this is the kind of pizza demand I'm going to have on such and such day, on Super Bowl, on 4th of July, on, such and such day, if it's a Tuesday, if it's a Wednesday. And then that's what we were able to do as well. For one of our customers, we created a platform and fed the weather data into it so they could predict the number of calls they were getting for air conditioning repairs. And they're a nationwide company. And I mean, you will be astounded with the accuracy that it presents. So the pace of innovation is like amazing, and especially in manufacturing and logistics. But how do you stay ahead of the curve? I think that's the question that I want to get to.
So that's really the AI level question, right? How do you stay ahead of the curve? To some extent, you have to keep yourself abreast of the technology that is out there. So there are no two ways that you have to be a student of the subject. So to continue to study, keep yourself plugged in with various conferences, various networking forums, and working with futurists such as yourself as well. I mean, these are all networking, right? You learn from each other. It's your openness to learning, and it is your ability to learn and then look at a situation and connect the two dots. That's the simplest answer I can provide. There's no magic bullet, as such.
I think it's a great answer. I think it is your mindset to try new things. I mean, we have so many different tools that our marketing department, our sales department uses across the board for different geographies, but they're still asking and getting new tools. And they're like, Arvind, there's a new tool that's come. It's called, Mail Blusters. I'm like, okay, well, we already have Seamless. We already have Zoom Info. We already have this. But no, this is a brand new tool. So being open to trying new products in the market, running those small experiments and learning from it, and understanding that every few months there's going to be this breakthrough that's going to happen, and there's going to be new tools that if you're not leveraging, your competitors are, and they're going to have that competitive edge. So, you want to always be looking to find ways to increase revenue, decrease cost, of course, create that better experience for your end user. But what about the risk management strategies, and what are the key risks facing the global supply chain today, and how can companies effectively mitigate some of those risks?
It's a great question. Risk is let me first give credit to a company that really taught me risk, and which was my background in pharmaceuticals, working with Merck. Pharmaceutical companies, by their very nature, are extremely risk averse and extremely conservative. Now, when we think about risk, Arvind, we always think about risk in terms of a disruption of supply. That's typically what supply chain practitioners or even manufacturing practitioners we think. But that was the first company which takes every business KPI looks at every business KPI from the lens of a risk. Is it a cost risk? Is it a compliance risk? Is it a delivery risk? Is it a capacity risk? So that is where I learned. And then you formulate your strategy based on, one, how much is the risk and what is your risk appetite? So you have to develop those bands. How much can that rubber band basically stretch before you break? Is how they define the risk appetite. And then from that point, you try to tighten it, depending on how much you want to tighten it. So some of the key risks, for example, in today's DNA, that I'm talking a little bit holistically, I'm looking at, number one, we look at geopolitical risk. And the biggest geopolitical risk today is associated with the Far East. We all know without mentioning. To give you a context, United States imports about $500 billion from the People's Republic of China. And there is a huge hue and cry in the United States. Oh my God, we have to decouple. You cannot. You cannot just decouple $500 billion worth of trade in 2 days. But to some extent, then what you can do is determine what is most critical for your national infrastructure, what is very critical for your security infrastructure, and then decouple those. In fact, even though I am not a proponent of decoupling, I hate it because I think trade makes nations come closer as opposed to when you decouple. But looking at that, then you take a look at, okay, the smaller, less riskier to the geopolitical risk, and then you develop your strategy. Is your strategy now to go to a third country such as India, or to go to Vietnam, or to go to Taiwan? So how you take that risk and how you determine your capital investment strategies is one way to blunt that geopolitical risk. Then in terms of cost risk, which I think has been practiced for a very long time, is how well have you established your supply agreements or your contracts?
Sure.
They can blunt that risk. These are not really rocket science. It's a discipline of identifying and putting the strategy and then executing upon them is how you're able to manage risk. Risk is always going to be there.
Absolutely.
The moment you think about a for-profit model means risk.
Absolutely.
The moment you step out of the house means it's risk.
Absolutely. No, I like the idea of decoupling. Of course, you got to have alternatives, right? You can't put all of your eggs in one basket. Of course, when you do that, and if you're going to have an alternative manufacturer, let's say now not in China, but now in India or Taiwan or, Vietnam, then there's going to be some costs. And of course, there's going to be that overhead of, managing 2 or 3 different manufacturing plants or suppliers. But that offsets the risk. So
that's right. What's your trade-off, right? Which ones are you trading off, right? I mean, it's like you're saving some, but you're doing something else. I mean, what is more important to your business at that point in time is going to help you to define that trade-off.
True.
Act on it.
And I think in different parts, like in Middle East too now, like the Suez Canal and, then the attacking of those ships in those routes by Houthi rebels. I mean, sometimes it feels like the world is on fire, and I'm a content creator as well, and I sometimes create content around that, and it's crazy. It's so hard to predict. But I guess what you're saying is that's why you create those bands and
develop your strategy. Well, I'll give you. You mentioned Suez Canal.
Jamie,
you mentioned
there's something very similar, by the way. Hey, don't think that recession's not going to happen. It is going to happen.
Of course, it's going to happen.
And how well planned you are, how well you could look at, and cover for all those possible scenarios. It's good. However, for a startup, I mean, you want to be risk seeking, and me personally as well. Like I am very risk seeking. I'm at times inviting new opportunities, and I know that something might not work out, but I'm still wanting to learn from it. And I think learning from that is extremely important as well. Sorry, I didn't even interject. You were saying something.
No, so two key points. Yeah, two key points you made, right? I'll come to this latter point you just made too. You mentioned the Suez Canal. Suez Canal is a function of a geopolitical risk, but you also forget climate risk. So exactly the same thing, the situation happened in the Panama Canal, where the water level got so down that you were barely able to get your ships across. So it's, the world is indeed on fire, right?
Yes,
so now you have to think. Now, the second, and the talk about risk taking that we are as entrepreneurs, it is also the severity of failing, right? In a large corporation, when they take a risk and they fail, the impact is of epic proportion. But whereas in a smaller initiative, if you fail, it's not as impactful. Yeah, you get a little bit hurt, you get up and you run, right? So I always use the word. So we are much more nimbler. So and so it's a function of how big you are. I mean, it's too big to fail, right? Kind of a thing.
Absolutely. Because, first of all, like most things, there's this example in this book, like write down what's the worst that can happen and make a list of all the, terrible things that can happen. This is from 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, one of the very first books that I read. And then he says, and then look at that list and say, none of that is gonna really happen. Like, what is the probability of that happening? I mean, that's one, because of course, if it's because of the scale, and that's why the startups can take, so much risk, because what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I mean, it's
right.
Shit, but I think it's so true.
There's a very good tool, actually mentioned the book, that you and I have been both exposed to, and probably we have utilized it significantly. For risk management, I go back to a very simple tool called failure modes and effects analysis, right? So we have both been coached, and we have FMEA. I mean, you talk about each one, the cost, quality, delivery, compliance, you write them down and say all the things that can, all the risks associated with this. And then you determine, based on your risk score, which ones you want to go after. Some of the risks you don't even need to go after because you had enough appetite to absorb it, basically.
Absolutely. No, and that's a good discussion on risk. So from risk to sustainability now, I guess, how important is sustainability in today's supply chain operations, and what steps can company can take to ensure their supply chains are both efficient but also environmentally responsible?
Yeah, and it's actually a good question, right? By definition, the more global your supply chains are, the less sustainable it is, because you are going to be polluting the environment. I mean, again, it's a trade-off, right? However, I think as we look to the future, there are few things that are already happening. I think there is a healthy amount of nearshoring happening, which is not completely decoupling your supply chain. So I think nearshoring is not only a good idea to hedge your risk against geopolitics, but it's also a good idea to help support the sustainability initiatives. I think that's one.
Totally.
The second key area, there is a rise of manufacturing technology, and it's going to become more and more mainstream, which is 3D printing. 3D printing was quite limited in terms of the type of materials it could handle and the speed with which you could produce. I think this is also it has developed quite a bit. Now you have companies that are 3D printing whole houses. So I think this is going to blunt the effect of sustainability. And also from a sustainability perspective, it's a near zero waste process. So, you're not throwing energy away. Anytime you produce, you're actually using energy, right? What percentage of that energy you're throwing away is your scrap factor, basically, right? So I think this is a key area of sustainability. And then the last but not the least, at least in my mind, is the very fact, if you help these small to mid-sized businesses get more efficient, it makes it more sustainable too, right? Because they don't have to utilize inefficient methods to develop the product. Now they are utilizing more efficient methods to produce. So these all kind of weigh into sustainability. This is how I think about it.
I think it's super comprehensive, and especially in the supply chain operations, I think I didn't put that 2 and 2 together until you mentioned it, that yes, I think nearshoring or having alternate facilities or, the 3D printing, that cuts huge costs of transportation. So I think, so that's why it's extremely important. And then tying it with the small, medium-sized businesses and making them efficient, I think is also very, very cool. What about some of the best practices in managing inventory effectively, especially in this rapidly changing business environment? What tips do you have for that?
I think I always go back to how well you design your supply network with that, number one. And when I talk about a supply network, what I'm not saying is that everything should be near short, because just by the mathematical definition, the shorter the lead time, the lower the inventory you have in your pipeline. That's not what I mentioned. What I really mean is how well how much time have you spent in picking the right partner for your business? Because the more robust your partner is, the more efficient their processes are, the less your inventory burden, right? Number one. The second key aspect is communication between you and your partners, which is your supply partners. The more you communicate, I think the less is the inventory, less of the amount of inventory you have to carry in your pipeline. And when I talk about communication, more specifically, it is your demand planning. The greater you communicate your demand plan or the change to your demand plan, the more, and almost in real time, the more your partners are able to vary their supply according to your demand. And this is the best practice, really. I've seen what sets the good from the bad is the communication and a formal channel of communicating, and the process used to manage the inventory is what really makes it. So that's really, really very key.
Lovely. And utilizing technology for that is going to make it super efficient. So
yeah,
I guess then moving to technology, from your perspective, what are some emerging technologies or trends that have the potential to really revolutionize supply chain management in the near future?
So we already, I think, touched base on it a little bit early on during our conversation. I mean, if you take a look at any good ERP system today, right? I mean, SAP's HANA, everything has a very good advanced planning tool if utilized effectively. And each of these modules are also now bringing to bear with them the AI capabilities as well, which are able to flex the parameters in real time. I think we are going to see more and more of this. And again, this also kind of impacts the sustainability, right? The 7 waste. The more you're able to communicate, the more you're able to be closer to the market requirements, the less you produce and the less is the amount of waste. So I think this is a very rising. So the more connected you are with the partners' systems, the connectivity of the partner system, how well they talk with each other, and also from a governance standpoint, how closely connected you are is what's going to determine. So in my mind, it's your ERPs, how well they communicate, talk to each other. So
it's very interesting that you say that because, of course, I think I understand the importance of ERP, but that's just so essential. But I think that's why maybe some people may not give as much importance to continuously integrating that with AI. And I think that makes sense. I was also expecting to, at times when I'm talking to smart people like yourself in this field, I'm expecting to hear about autonomous driving or, like electric trucks. And I think, some of those technologies, or robotics and, managing the warehouses and, or the route planning, that can happen as well. I think some of that is also what comes to mind. But I think your take on that is, get focus on the ERP,
focus on get the basics right?
Exactly.
So really the single biggest draw, I mean, the weight on your supply chain is the amount of inventory you carry in your supply chain. And the more efficient you are in terms of projecting and meeting that projection as closely, you're narrowing that band, really helps a company with its working capital requirements. Towards the end, what you're making is you're making the warehousing process more efficient. So AGVs, etc. Yes, they have, but I think the larger capital, you're tying up a lot more capital in your inventory, pipeline inventory, than on the warehousing side of it. That's already happened basically. So
Understood. Well, great. Fantastic, Rahul. And so what advice would you offer to the young entrepreneurs, to people who are trying to have an impact in the supply chain domain, or even companies that are looking at all of these disruptive technologies in this space? What advice would you have looking ahead for them?
So first of all, to all up-and-coming entrepreneurs, fail fast. Try it, doesn't work, pivot, try it. Yeah, that's the iteration you have to do. And The second advice is not my original, but it is Steve Jobs, who said, don't invent a technology and then try to find a solution for it. So uncover a real problem and find a technology to support that need. That really helps that really will reverberate with the customer, because if you develop the technology first, which would be a great technology, but it would be a shame if you don't find a real world application for it to be applied to. So that is what I would do. And then from a realistic, all those of you as entrepreneurs, from a supply, it's a mind-blowing field. Again, if you love the cross-functional approach, I mean, it's one of the best fields to be in. It's highly, the cross-functional, so it's wonderful, interdisciplinary.
Love that. Of course, that's something that I've learned across many different domains, of course, by making mistakes myself. But even during my MBA at UT Austin, we had a professor, Rob. He actually wrote a book on it that said, if you build it, they would come. And he had this capstone program for the entire duration of 2 years that we were getting our MBA, where we would have lectures every semester. But the focus was on spending a lot of time on market validation, on finding the problem that you want to solve, instead of just, of course, if you build it, they would come. You can't think like that. You can't have that mindset. So definitely great advice, and thank you for that. And with that said, folks, we're wrapping up another riveting exploration into the heart of industry with Rahul Gangulee. We extend our heartfelt gratitude for Rahul for generously sharing his invaluable insights. As we bid adieu, let's reflect on the gems he's imparted, the essence of agility, innovation, and resilience that drive the wheels of supply chain excellence. Remember, in the dynamic world of industry, adaptability is key. Innovation is fuel and resilience is armor. So let's harness these principles as we chart our course towards a future defined by efficiency, sustainability, and success. Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and stay ahead of the curve. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.